I'm just going to do a little bit of a word study this morning. Is that all right? So let's break down extravagant. Let's break down extravagant. See, there's this Latin word vagare, which means to wander or to roam. Right? It's from this word where we get the word vagrant, a wanderer. Right? Vagare, to wander or to roam. Now, the prefix extra means beyond, above, outside. So, extravagant literally means wandering outside the normal limits. And you can see how someone like myself, who values words, gets excited when he looks at this and thinks, hey, I know someone who has wandered outside what would be normal to love me. I know someone who has demonstrated even a love for me that wanders outside the normal limits. And we know this from 1 John 3, verse 1. Consider the kind of extravagant love the Father has lavished on us. He calls us children of God. Come on, that is love that has wandered outside the normal limits. Why? Because he can't abide in the presence of sin, and all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and yet he calls us, those who have said yes to following Jesus, who call him as Lord and are living a life to honor him, children of God. Come on, what I love about this is that the first extravagance that God pours upon us is a recreation of our identity. Remember, we talked about how mammon, last week, mammon comes in and it seeks to be able to give us identity by what we can have or what we can do, what we may be able to inhabit these places, but only God can provide an identity that is actually going to provide any sort of stability in our own world. What is that identity? Do you know this morning that you are a child of God? Do you know that he created you, that he made you fearfully and wonderfully, that he knit you together in your mother's womb? Do you know that this morning? Because it needs to move beyond a no to a no. It needs to move beyond an intellectual assent. In fact, I heard it said this week, come on, Christianity is not a philosophy or an argument that we need to give assent to, but rather it is a person that we need to put our trust in. And so if nothing else, we put our trust in the fact that even if I don't feel like a child of God, I trust the fact that Jesus died for me while I was still a sinner, while I was still his enemy, at enmity to the Father. Christ died for us. So I pray that you would have maybe experienced in your gut this morning that sense of his extravagant love, his love wandering outside the normal limits. In fact, he had to roam outside what was normal in order to pour that love on you this morning. And then so it goes on. It's true, we are his beloved children. And in the same way that the world didn't recognize him, the world doesn't recognize us either. Come on, as we walk as a child of God, the world won't recognize us. We should be wandering so far outside the normal bounds of life that the world's like, I can't understand how that is something that you can do. How can you demonstrate that kind of love to me? That doesn't make sense. Come on, if we don't look any different to other cultural clubs, political persuasions in the world, what different has the church become? We're called not to just love those who agree with us, whose beliefs line up on our side, but even those that we are completely counter to in our understanding. We are called to love extravagantly. See, in fact, extravagance is often exceeding what is reasonable or appropriate. It's excessive or elaborate. I lost control again. I don't like losing control. No, I'll lose control, that's okay, but you might just have to go with me, boys. Exceeding what is reasonable or appropriate. Do you know that God's love for you is not reasonable? And it's completely inappropriate. God's love for you goes so far beyond what is reasonable. It's excessive and it's elaborate. To live an extravagant life, here we often understand extravagance through this lens, lacking restraint in spending money or using resources. Come on, lacking restraint. When we're living an extravagant life, we often called to let go of normal restraints. Now, sometimes there are some restraints that we are called to embrace, but letting go of these normal restraints. Now, we've been going through this series, Entrusted, and I thought about maybe we need to push Miracle Sunday out because a few of our other churches around the country, come on, our guys in Auckland, they're certainly not meeting together. Some of the other ones around the country, they're not able to have in-person services because the venues that they hire, the facilities that they use are not available to them. But come on, I believe that for us today to get the ball rolling, to prophetically put a line in the sand and say we've been entrusted even with a facility that just enables us to have a service this morning and to push that boat out and to actually lead the way in what's happening in Equippers Church. Not Equippers Church in Masterton, but in Equippers Church. Come on, we're pushing the boat out first. And I didn't want to waste that opportunity because we've been entrusted with it. And I would rather fail than be found to be wasteful. So we've been talking about this series, Entrusted, and we're talking about stewardship. So when we think about stewardship, we might think looking after what belongs to someone else. And we might think there is some normal limits around which I can look after what belongs to someone else. But come on, I want to encourage us this morning that to be entrusted extravagantly is to then, for us to have a heart to steward extravagantly. What is extravagant stewardship? It's stewardship outside the normal limits. In fact, we know that Jesus' heart for us as his followers was to be people that didn't just go the mile, but in fact that we're called to be people that go the extra mile. When I've been entrusted with a property that is someone else's, I'm not just going to look after it as though it was mine. I'm going to look after it better than if it was mine. I've been entrusted with this, so I'm actually going to do a better job. I'm going to do... Come on, we've been entrusted extravagantly. And I pray this morning that our heart would find a place outside the normal limits. What I'm preaching this morning, I don't want to cast a vision that I can fundraise to. Because like I said last week, it's not about money or God. I don't need money to fulfill the vision that he's put on our heart. So I want to just get into a place where that's not what I'm wanting to do this morning. We are taking up an offering at the end of today. But come on, I want us to find something in our spirits that finds this place of stewarding extravagantly. So mostly what God does is love you. How cool is that? Ephesians 5 and verse 2. Mostly what God does is love you. So keep company with him and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. His love was not cautious, but extravagant. Come on, like I say, Christ's love towards you was not cautious, but it was extravagant. Why can we be okay singing a song like Reckless Love? Well, because Christ's love towards you was not cautious. It was extravagant. It went outside the normal realms. In fact, you know, if you've got 99 sheep and one of them gets lost, it would actually be normal stewardship to just look after the 99 that you've got. Because how many know one is less than 99? But come on, to love outside the normal limits, to flip the system on the head, is to learn to go after the one. It goes on, observe how Christ loves us, was not cautious. He didn't love in order to get something from us, but to give everything of himself to us. Love like that. How many know that the world's definition of love is always caveated by there's something that I get in return? I love you because there is something that you can do for me. I love you because you think the same way as me. I love you because we are on the same team. I love you because we are on the same page. But come on, we're called here, love like that. Paul is saying, go outside of the normal limits. Come on, love extravagantly. Someone say, love extravagantly. Come on, outside the normal limits. Would you be a wanderer with me this morning? Come on, would you commit with me to a life of loving people, wandering outside the normal limits? What are the normal limits? The normal limits are people that it would be appropriate for me to show my love to. When the world looks and sees me hanging out with sinners, when the world looks and sees, not even when the world sees it, but come on, when the Pharisees saw Jesus wandering outside and demonstrating love to the lost, they looked at him and go, man, who is this guy that he would eat with tax collectors and sinners? Come on, who is this guy? He's a guy that demonstrated how to love outside the limits. And you say, well, Matt, this morning, how are you going to segue this to talking about miracle offering? How does this work? When we're talking about love, you see, love is an issue of the heart. Love is an issue of the heart, and you'll probably, if you've ever preached a sermon or thought about preaching, you'll probably be able to make this not too large of a leap. But you see, how do I change the condition of my heart? How can I reposition where my heart is? Well, in Matthew 6, in the Beatitudes, Jesus gives us a little bit of an indicator of how to do this. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Do you know the easiest way to wander outside the lines and love people who we think are unlovable? Put our money where our mouth is. To put our treasure where we want our heart to go is the way to get our heart there. Remember, it's not where your heart is, there your treasure will be. It's not that. This is not a chicken and the egg situation. It's not, well, which one goes first? Jesus is saying this pretty plainly. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your mints are, there your heart will be also. Sharon's demonstrating her love for me by throwing mints at me this morning. M-I-N-T-S. Not M-I-N-C-E. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. See, it's one of these things where when it comes to things like tithes and offerings within the life of church, I don't have to ask whether someone's giving because I can look and see where the heart is. And I can see a heart that is completely sold out to his church, a heart that is completely sold out for his kingdom. And I know that that person is tithing and giving and putting the money on the line. When I hear, I don't feel connected, I just don't feel like I can belong, I can trace that back. What do they say? Follow the money. When I hear language like, I just don't feel connected, I don't feel like I can belong, I can trace that back and I go, where is the treasure invested? Because that's where the heart will be. So I'm not even needing to look and see, oh man, is someone tithing, is someone giving? I just need to see, where is the heart sold out for? Is the heart sold out into business? Is the heart sold out into the stock market? Is the heart sold out into rental portfolios or into the next car that I can buy? Is my heart sold out into the next holiday that I can go on? We can reverse engineer. And so then, if I can identify the problem, the solution, Jesus says, is quite plain and quite simple. Come on, why don't you put your money where your mouth is, outside the normal limits? If you want to love his body, love his church in an extravagant way, come on, let's learn to be people that wander outside of what is normal. When I think about what is normal, we have a look at this verse in Proverbs, and we hold on to a verse like this as though it definitely still applies today, right? This verse is definitely for today, and I'm okay with that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lead not on your own understanding. Who's heard that verse before? Come on, if you've been in church for any length of time, you've probably heard that verse. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. So that applies today, right? That's wisdom for today. We don't trust in our own understanding, but we lean in to what the Lord is saying. We're okay with that being for today, right? So why, 2 verses later, when we read this, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruit of all your crops, and your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Why do we think, oh, that was Old Testament? So I need to trust the Lord and lean not on my understanding. I can take that one into today. But why, when I honor him with my wealth? Well, I can believe that my barns will be filled to overflowing. Yeah? So maybe rather than throw one out because it's in the Old Testament, maybe I could lean into the fact that, come on, the wisdom of God that's been spoken from the creation of the world is outworking over generations upon generations a different way to live. Come on, when I honor the Lord with wealth. Who likes a will be? Who likes a will be? Now, the thing that I don't like about a will be is that there's no time frame. So I love what Pastor Sam said this morning. Come on, let's not be people that just eat all of our seed. Let's be people that sow seed. And come on, will be filled to overflowing. But a wise farmer knows that I sow and then there's a gap. And so to wander outside the normal realms is to be someone who's okay with the gap between the sowing and the reaping. The gap between, come on, I start trusting the Lord with everything. Come on, we've dealt with the ownership issue. Why don't we trust him with everything outside the normal realm? Outside the normal boundaries. We can see where we're going this morning, right? Who can remember this? Man, who appointed me as a judge or an arbiter between you? Just quick refresher, we talked about this guy last week. This is the younger brother who come to Jesus and said, hey, teach my brother to divide the inheritance. Because he wants to do like the 2/3 because he's older and I get 1/3. But come on, surely Jesus, you're about the 50-50. Surely you're about the 50-50 life, Jesus. You're fair and just, aren't you? And Jesus says, come on, who appointed me as a judge between you? Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. The things that you have don't define you. Why? Because your identity is a child of God. Nothing that you possess, nothing that you own will ever hold a candle to the fact that you are a child of God. There's nothing else on this earth that we can identify with that even comes close to being a child of God. Come on, Ben, you are divinely created, put together with his breath in your lungs and his word on your lips. So we've got to be protecting against all kinds of greed, right? We looked at that last week. We looked at there's greed in spending and there's greed in saving. And so as I was putting today's message together, I had this phrase, who used to like those books, Choose Your Own Adventure? Or pick up, so you'd start reading and then it would give you some choices, and then if you chose that, you turn to page 110, or if you choose that, you turn to page 97, right? Who used to love Choose Your Own Adventure? Well, I just want to encourage us when it comes to extravagance, because we are created in the image of God and he acts extravagantly, there is something in our nature that always will act extravagantly. There is something about us as humans that longs to wander outside of the normal limits. There's something about the divinity that's in you. And so as I was putting this together, this phrase comes to me, choose your extravagance. In what way are we don't actually get to choose whether we will be extravagant. Why? We've been entrusted extravagantly. So we will steward and we will live extravagantly. How does it work? To where does our extravagance land? And so we talked about the spending and we talked about saving. We talked about greed, or we talked about giving. There are some options this morning that I want us to put our attention towards when it comes to choosing our extravagance. See, these three things are laid out in different pictures throughout Scripture. When it comes to extravagant spending, we might turn our thoughts towards the prodigal son who's like, right, Dad, give me my inheritance now. You're as good as dead to me. I just want everything that you've got, and I'm going to go and do what I want with it, and squandered the estate with loose living. Squandered the estate with loose living, with party. Now, do you know what's not loose living? Paying the power bill, feeding your family, right? Putting a roof over their head, right? Those things, so don't hear what I'm not saying with this. We're talking about loose living. But we can squander our estate by looking for things that will bring joy outside of our identity as children of God. This is why, like for me, I'm thinking at the moment, when it comes to things like holidays And it's like, man, we save for ages to go on that holiday in the hope that that will make the last 48 weeks of a sucky year okay, because we can redeem it with that holiday. And then we go on holiday, and certainly if we have kids, but even if we don't have kids and we just want to pack as much in, we come back from holiday needing a holiday. Any tired holidayers? You get the idea, right? There are things that we can put our money and our resource towards because our heart is that we hope that, man, we'll have a great family time when we're on holiday, but then we just end up bickering and we come back more tired. I don't know. So we can extravagantly spend. We can spend outside the normal limits. In fact, I would go so far as to say there is a problem that we create. We talked about the credit card thing. The reason that that exists is because the majority of people have been taught to spend outside the normal limits. What is the normal limits? Here's how much I earn, and here's how much I spend. That's spending outside, that's spending extravagantly. Here's how much income, here's the outgoings. Where does that end up with us? That ends up with us in deficit, in debt, enslaved to the salt mines to pay off that debt over the next 40 years of our life, when hopefully we can retire at 65 and find some sort of respite. But by the time I get there, it'll be like 75 probably, if it even exists. Right? So we've kind of identified we can spend extravagantly. Anything that's beyond what we earn, that's extravagant spending. We don't want to squander like that. But we can hoard extravagantly. Now, when it comes to the normal limits of collecting, maybe there's some wisdom that has crept in that is actually wisdom of the world and not wisdom of the kingdom. And I want to explore this with you. I just want to put some ideas out there. You see, when I think about God's provision for the Israelites in the desert, they could hoard how much? Enough for that day. So let's just play with this for a little moment. Jesus tells this story. He told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Come on. Everyone says yes and amen. I'm believing for an abundant harvest. Come on. The rental portfolio, the stock market, the farm, whatever it is. I love that word from Pastor Bruce with his vats, like creating milk to overflowing with 80 cows when the farm down the road was doing less with 160 cows. Come on, that's the type of harvest that we want to be entrusted with. Right? Now, there is some wisdom that might say, what am I going to do with the excess? I know what, I'll pull down my current silos, the current structures that can hold the excess, and I'll build bigger ones so that I can store my surplus grain, and then I'll say to myself, well, you've got plenty of grain laid up for many years now. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Do you know what I reckon? I reckon this pretty much defines normal conventional wisdom in saving for retirement. Just my thought. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. Matt's thought, not gospel, but I'm just putting it out there this morning. Come on, take life easy. Sweet, I've got enough now. I'm financially secure. I've got plenty to last for the rest of my life. Now I can just take it easy. Right? Does that sound like conventional wisdom? Sounds like, yep, that's good stewardship. Right. God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you, and who will get what you've prepared for yourself? See, here's the kicker. Who are we preparing for? What is today's miracle offering all about? For the generations. See, I reckon there's an extravagant building that doesn't look at building a portfolio that sustains myself, but looks at something generationally that can go, I'm not just thinking about the next 40 years, I'm thinking about what are we doing today that's going to influence the next 400 years. If Jesus doesn't come back in that time, maybe he will, that's fine. But am I thinking in that way? and preparing in that way, because that might be going outside the normal bounds. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. So here's another little thing, right? It doesn't say this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves. And then full stop. So by all means, store up things for yourselves. By all means, plan for retirement. By all means, plan to pass on wealth in your generation. By all means. But is not rich toward God. Come on, what's the caveat? When was the last time that I was rich toward God? When was the last time that I was rich toward His house? We talked about this last week. We talked about tithes and alms giving. Throughout the whole tenet of Scripture, we see we give into the storehouse as the local church, and we give to the poor. And the poor are always going to be with us, so that's not going to run out. That job's going to happen, right? And the storehouse needs to be full so that we can do that. So then it comes to extravagant giving. Giving outside the normal bounds. And this is, I want to just unpack extravagant giving for a moment here. I pray that this would maybe offend the flesh a little bit. That this would offend conventional wisdom a little bit. That this might take what is the normal bounds and just push the boat a little bit beyond that. So I'm prepared to till this ground today, because this is something that the Lord's speaking into my own life, and I want to lead us through this. You might have heard of this before. When it comes to giving, there are some levels of giving that we can explore. Anyone ever seen something like this before? We learn to tithe, we learn to give offerings, and then we learn to give extravagant offerings. So we settled the fact that we don't own anything. Everything comes from the Lord. So tithing is giving back that 10% because that was His in the first place. We've settled that one. If I don't do that, I'm not really even giving. It's just robbing from God. Right? So that's our entry point into where our finances go. And then we can start to learn the game of offering. What is that? Well, that's going above and beyond. Now, because God's let me have 90%, and I'm actually going to, some of that I'm going to give to the poor. I'm going to sow some extra of that into the house of God. Right? And we can do that within normal bounds. We can do that with wisdom. Well, but then we get into this whole thing of extravagant offerings. Man, I pray that this finds the joy in your heart that it's found in mine, because there's this ability to learn to give outside what is the normal bounds, to wander outside what makes sense and see God provide and bless us, because come on, can we outgive God? So this is a playground that has just kind of found this fresh picture in my own mind of, come on, is my giving wandering outside what is normal? Or have I settled into even just the normal bounds? So extravagant offerings outside the normal limits. An example, I'll give you some examples of some extravagant offerings from Scripture, so you can kind of see where I'm going with this. It was customary on the day of coronation for the king of Israel that they would offer a burnt offering, which for a king was a bull. Right? Because the king had lots, and so even the sacrificial system recognized that if you have lots of money, you offer bulls. If you don't have much at all, you might give a dove, and somewhere in between. And we'll get to this in a moment. But so a king who has access to everything, his duty, what was normal offering, was a bull. But we see in 1 Kings 3, this is Solomon, he went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, and he offered 1,000 bulls in that place. So that's going a little bit outside the normal, right? So it's 1,000 times what was normal giving. Do you know what the result of this was? You do, if you've been in church for any length of time. The result of this extravagant offering was, flip, I've seen your heart towards me. What do you want? Do you want power? Do you want significance? Do you want wealth? And that's when Solomon makes an even smarter decision, and he says, give me wisdom. And boy, doesn't the Lord pour out all of it. So in response to extravagance comes even greater entrustment. in response to our extravagance. David, you might have heard this, for a king, it was within the normal bounds when he wanted to give something to go up to so-and-so. There's Rob down the road. Hey, Rob, I need a bull from your farm because I have to go make an offering. That was fine for a king to do, right? If there's a king, he can actually just take what he wants, right? It's gone pretty quiet on Miracle Sundays. We're talking about money, and I told you I was pushing the boat out and offending the flesh a little bit. It's totally fine. But this is David's heart. No, I'm going to buy them for you at a price. Even though it is normal that I could just take it and then offer it, I refuse to give burnt offerings to the Lord that cost me nothing. So for King David, his heart was, do you know what? It would be normal that I could do that, but I'm going to give extravagantly by going outside the normal bounds. I love using other people's words. And one person's words that I like using is C.S. Lewis, and he says, if our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say that they are too small. So there's this phrase, I don't want to give an offering that doesn't cost me something. I refuse to live a life that doesn't cost me. What is a pinch? Pinch hurts a little bit. Have you ever stepped into the place of giving and then afterwards it's like, oh man, that hurts? What does it mean to be hampered? To be hampered is to not be able to do things that maybe you wanted to do. Do you know when Justine and I give in the life of church, we give knowing that there will be some things that we as a family can't do because it hampers us. It sets us back. I can't give and save. I can't save at the same level as what I think is wise. I can't spend at the same level and bless my family with certain things like holidays and things because I have chosen to give. Thank you, C.S. Lewis. You should say that they're too small. If it doesn't hurt a little bit, if it doesn't set us back a little bit, come on Miracle Sunday. I didn't change the scripture reference for this, so this certainly is not in 1 Kings. I've just noticed my mistake. See, here's another example of extravagant giving. See, because for a king to give 1,000 bulls is actually pretty straightforward. Right? And in fact, the whole sacrificial system was set up with the Pharisees and the rich men, and they would come into the house of God with their big bags of gold and be like, look how much I'm giving, look at how great I am. And Jesus tells this story. He doesn't tell the story, he points it out. He notices something going on while the offering's being taken up, and he points out extravagance. He says, see that widow who's put in just her 2 mites. You see that? She has given more extravagantly than those guys who brought in their suitcases of cash. Truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all of these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. Now, commentators would point to this picture and say that Jesus was pointing out the injustice of a system that was set up in such a way that this could happen. Right? There is no world in which a widow should have to put in all that she has and then have nothing left. Right? But it's not talking about the amount that's given. When it comes to extravagance, it's talking about the issue of the heart. And I've heard it said before, generosity is not a place of how much we give, but generosity comes down to how much do we have left. See, for me to live a generous life for you is to live a life where I've got nothing left in the tank at the end of the day. For me to love you, I've got to pour myself out for you. Do you know what? Jesus demonstrated to us what it meant to love so much that he had nothing left in the tank. The only reason I can talk like this and we can talk about living and loving outside of what is the normal bounds is because Christ first loved us. In fact, to this level, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. What was God's mercy? Christ put to death on a cross. In view of the offering that God made to reconcile us to him, offer your whole selves. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, all of your life holy and pleasing to God. Now, I hadn't word studied this before, but interestingly, when it says this is your true and proper worship, that word is logikos, which is reasonable. Do you know what? Because Jesus gave everything for us, it's actually reasonable that we give our whole life for him. This is true and proper worship. It's logical that when I have a view of what God has done for me, I would be prepared to give everything back to him. Isn't that fun? Because when I think about this, it's like, wow, yeah, if I give my whole life to Jesus, that's really extravagantly loving him back. It's like, no, actually giving my whole life over is what makes sense. That's what's reasonable. And I just wonder whether sometimes the reason that we haven't put it all on the line is because we don't have a big enough view of what was taken off the line for us. Sometimes the reason that we hold back is because we don't have the clarity of picture of what we've been saved from. What we've had paid, the debt that we've had paid that I couldn't ever hope to pay. When it comes to the way that we give, and people might say things to me like, oh, Matt, you know that tithe thing, remember that was that Old Testament stuff? And I'm like, oh, great, you're engaged in New Testament giving. So cool. Isn't that awesome? Like, man, I love the early church's heart. Man, that's so risky. Like, I haven't sold a house and brought all of the money into the church and laid it at the feet of the apostle. What's it like? Can you teach me how to engage that New Testament level of faith? Because, like, in my own self, I feel like there's room for me to grow. It's like, how do we engage in Acts type of giving? It's like, here's the thing. From time to time, those who own land, right? So it's also not stating out to us, look, if you've got houses, you have to go and sell them and bring them all together. Because here's the thing, we're not talking about this forced redistribution of wealth. There's a political statement on a Sunday morning. That's not the heart of the kingdom of heaven. The heart of heaven is that you and I, from time to time, we might see that, do you know what? There's a house that I've got sitting there, and there's a need that needs to be met. Maybe I could sell what I have and be the answer to that. Man, I could liquidate that investment. Because there's someone that has need above and beyond. Man, we could sow into this thing. So I don't know whether there's anyone here that's fully engaged in this New Testament level of giving, but I want to go on a little bit of a journey to explore what that looks like. That for me is a pretty exciting sort of a space. And here's this thing here. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of, do you know what my responsibility is? I need to grow in the power with which I'm preaching his gospel. There's the responsibility for me standing in this position of leadership. It's like, come on, Matt, when you testify to the goodness of God, is there power that comes along with that, or is it just more wise and persuasive words? And I'll find it there somewhere. Here it is. Why does any of this work? Why is any of this possible? Because God's grace was so powerfully at work in them that there was no needy person among them. Come on, could you believe with me to see God's grace at work so powerfully here at Equippers Church in Masterton that there would be no one who ever went without? Can we believe for that kind of grace? Jared, do you want to come up and join me? There's a few keys in here. All the believers were of one heart and one mind. Come on, where's unity? Where's togetherness? Where's turning my thoughts towards my brothers and sisters? Come on, look at the person on your left, the person on your right. No one claimed that any of their possessions were their own. I like that we're at this place now because we've dealt with the issue of ownership. Nothing that I have is my own, right? As followers of Jesus. Maybe you're sitting here this morning and you don't identify as a follower of Christ, you're not following his way, then let this message wash over, take out of it what was useful. But come on, for us as believers, we just remind ourselves that, come on, my life even is not my own. When there's need that requires my time, when there's need that requires my energy, come on, it's not my own to hold on to. Freely I have received, so freely I should give. Like I said, I did want to start this whole thing with the point that we were heading towards taking up a miracle offering. But I really felt like there was something that I needed to preach and a word that needed to come out, and that's for us as people would put a stake in the ground where we're saying, do you know what? I'm prepared to go outside what makes sense. I'm prepared to wander outside the normal limits of wisdom, and I'm prepared to wander outside the usual realm in response to God's goodness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of you young people. 1, 2, how many, what do we got? We've got a few buckets. So on the seats there are envelopes, there are pens with the envelopes, and we're going to take up the offering. Like I say, maybe over the last couple of weeks you have had conversations as husbands and wives. Maybe you need to go away and have those conversations. Come on, this morning I don't want to take up any tithe, any offering out of obligation, but come on, out of a joyful place. And so hopefully I've got mine somewhere. It's in one of my pockets. There it is. So I've prepared mine. I'm going to ask some of our young people to come and stand up the front. Just maybe two here. Just representing the next generation. And come on, as we sow in today, I just want to encourage you. Come on, let's be prepared to go above and beyond what makes sense. Like I talked about, you'll see there is a. Can I grab that? I put this online because the digital version was a little easier to read, but I have printed out a few of our annual reports. But what I'm not really interested in doing today is laying out, here's the vision that I want you to give into. Because I don't need money, I need God. Right? Today's offering is something about us going outside of what's normal and growing in our stewardship to that extravagant place. But so in here somewhere, like last year's miracle offering, we're sitting at about $32,000 for the year, which is cool. That's an awesome offering, and over the last few years, that's probably about the normal bound that I have found for us as a church. And so when I was thinking about, okay, Lord, what do you want me to have faith for? He talks about, well, what's outside the normal bounds? And you might remember, even though it doesn't always feel that way, but at the start of this year, I felt like it was this declaration, do you know what? This year's a year of the 2-for-1. So when I think about what's outside the normal bounds, even in the midst of COVID and even in the midst of whatever else is going on, come on, could we believe that we could take up a 2-for-1 offering in order to just position ourselves to this place to receive in a fresh way what he wants to pour out? So that's why I landed with this number, and I landed at 75,000 because that was twice what we took up last year. And so that doesn't make sense. It's not reasonable, right? But so I thought, well, that's why we break it down. And so I break it down into, well, that's 30 units of $2,500. How many units could I find of people giving $2,500? Well, 30 doesn't seem hard. I can take 2 of them. There's 28 left. How does that work? How does that overflow? Now, again, some of that is me giving out of my abundance. Maybe you're 13 and haven't got a job and don't earn an income, and 25 cents is more than my units. Great, that's giving extravagantly. We're not talking about amounts, we're talking about sacrifice. But as we take this up today, as we receive it in the hands of the generation that is, come on, we're sowing in here. Do you know what I love? Again, just honoring for Pastor Jonathan and Margaret. This church started to be sown into before I was born. I am the generation that was sown into. This building was bought when I was 8 years old. Sorry. Time flies when you're having fun. Right? Come on, who are the 8-year-olds today that are sitting out in that building that I'm going to give an offering to, that are going to stand on this platform one day and that are going to go into the marketplace and change the world, that are going to inhabit positions of influence in healthcare and medicine and politics and education? So, I'll give you a moment. As you feel led, maybe you still need to go away and have a conversation with your husband's wife. Because again, particularly for married people, please don't give out of disagreement. There's Matt's pastoral wisdom. We find agreement, right? We don't want to lose the unity. But come on, what can we invest? And so I'll just give you a couple of moments, maybe just as Jared tinkles away, maybe just prepare. And here's the thing I want to do today. As I put this in the bucket today, I'm making a statement in my own life that I need to learn and to grow into a place of living extravagantly. Come on, in my own life, could I learn to love even further outside the normal bounds? Could I learn to love a world that's hurting in a way that goes beyond what is normal? So we'll let that sit for a moment. As you fill it out, maybe you want to write down on there or in here some things you're believing for as well. Because how many know we can't outgive God? But I'm going to pray for this offering. And then I'm going to ask you to come from your seats as we receive it.